Welcome back to Wagon Wheel Homestead, where each week we share with you homesteading tips and tricks and teach you how to live a simple and sustainable life. My husband and I and our 5 children enjoy living close to the land on our 40-acre homestead in Nebraska, where we utilize the self-sufficient skills we have learned over a lifetime of homesteading. I was blessed to grow up gardening and preserving food since I was a little girl, and my husband grew up cattle ranching. Now we're able to use those skills to feed our family without having to purchase very much from outside sources like the grocery store. While we seek to be self-sufficient, we are mindful daily that we are really God-sufficient, as He is the one who sends the sunshine and the rain to feed us and our livestock. Along with gardening and preserving all of our vegetables, we raise our own beef, milk Jersey cows, make our own dairy products, and bake with sourdough. By involving our children in this lifestyle, we are seeking to preserve these old-fashioned skills by passing them down to the next generation. Join us as we share with you our journey and teach you how to grow a simple, sustainable life.
Welcome back, friends. I'm Laree with the blog wagonwheelhomestead.com, and I want to share with you today how you can start your own sweet potato slips in your very own home. Plant your sweet potatoes in a northern climate, and then 5 tips on how you can grow nice big sweet potatoes to feed your family all winter long. So the first thing you're going to want to do is in the late winter or early spring, usually in February or early March, take some sweet potatoes. Now these are organic sweet potatoes that I grew last year. If you don't have that option, you can try to find some organic sweet potatoes from a local farmer. Or you can order your own slips the first year and then, of course, save some of your sweet potatoes to cut slips off of for the following seasons, which is what I did. You don't really want to grow sweet potato slips from potatoes in the grocery store if you can help it, although it can be done, but a lot of times they have been sprayed with chemicals to keep them from sprouting. So it can be harder to get them to sprout, although I do know that it is still possible, but it's just better to start with organic sweet potatoes if at all possible. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to make sweet potato fries for our lunch. But before I'm doing that, I'm actually cutting off the little parts of the sweet potatoes that are starting to sprout because I don't want to waste those little slips that are starting to grow. A sweet potato slip is what you're going to plant into the ground. Sweet potatoes grow from plants. They don't grow by you putting the whole potato in the ground. They're very different than growing regular potatoes. And so if you leave your sweet potatoes sit out long enough, now these were harvested in September, and about 5 or 6 months later, they are now just starting to sprout, which doesn't hurt anything. And I'm actually happy to see that they are, because then I can cut off the pieces, and I'm just going to set them in a tray and put them in with a little bit of water in the bottom, and that's going to allow them to grow and start to develop leaves, and then I'll show you how we plant these. You can also stick the whole sweet potato in water and suspend it somehow with toothpicks or something in water and allow it to start to sprout if it hasn't already. But mine are always sprouting by the time that I need to start my sweet potato slips in the spring, and so this just works out well. I just make lots of sweet potatoes for dinner and cut off all of the slips and lay them in a tray, and then we're just going to put water right underneath of them. I put them under grow lights on my plant racks, and I can link for you how you can set up your own plant racks. And you just want to keep a little bit of water in the bottom, so check them every day, and they will start to produce leaves and actually grow roots. And the roots will get quite long. And so then what I usually do is just take some soil, some potting soil, put it into a recycled plastic container that I've gotten from my local greenhouse, or any kind of a container will work. Put some holes into your soil and then break off these little plants that have grown from those little pieces of sweet potatoes. You can see the roots are quite long, and I just stick them right down in the soil, and they will grow. And they'll get to be really long, but I'll show you how that's going to make you so many more plants when we get ready to plant these into the garden. And this is all that's left of those little tiny pieces of sweet potatoes that we had put into the water, and you can just throw those in the compost. And then I just water them well, put them back under the lights, and you can see they're growing very well.
Welcome to the garden. It's time to plant the sweet potatoes. It's late evening. It's always best to transplant when it's either cloudy and cool or towards evening so your plants don't shock as bad. These are the sweet potato slips. This is what they look like. Sometimes they're a little wilted, and that's okay. They're really pretty tough. I got these from Berlin Seeds. They just shipped them in, and I think they're in bundles of like 25 or something. And then I have actually 4 of these. My daughter's bringing the rest of them for me. These are the plants that I started myself. And what I want you to know is that if you start these early enough, you can actually plant the stem. So if you cut like 5 leaves, if you have 5 leaves on a section of stem, you can put 3 of those leaves down in the ground, plant them, they'll become roots, and leave the top 2 leaves sticking out. So if you start these like in January or February, so a lot earlier than I did, you could have like really long vines, and you could chop them up into a lot of different sweet potato slips, okay? So that's a really good way to get a lot of free plants off of even just a few sweet potatoes that you start slips from. So obviously, you know, these are just only so long, but that's fine. So I'm going to plant these out right quick here before it gets dark.
I did order some sweet potato slips, as I mentioned, because I wasn't able to start enough of my own this year. I actually could have probably grown enough if I'd have started them earlier, but I really didn't have room on my plant racks because I had so many other things. And you'll notice the sweet potato slips that you order, they may look sort of half dead compared to the plants that you start, but really they grow just fine. Sweet potatoes are kind of hard to kill. So we grow in a northern climate, zone 4B in Nebraska. And so as you can see here, we plant everything on black landscape fabric. That is for 2 reasons. One is to prevent weeds, which is really great for the sweet potatoes because they can just vine all over and it doesn't matter. And the other reason is to warm up the soil, which is really important for the sweet potatoes. It's not as important for some of the other crops I grow, like green beans or onions. But it's very important when you grow in a northern climate. This is tip number 1 I'm going to give you for having really good sweet potatoes in a northern climate, is you definitely want to grow them on a black landscape fabric. And I will link the fabric that I use down below. You can usually reuse it from year to year. And what I'm doing is I had just burned a hole in the landscape fabric, the center of the fabric, about 12 inches apart. If you burn the holes with a small torch, it will keep the holes from fraying. So I'm just putting a small hole into the soil and sticking the roots of the sweet potato right into the soil. You'll also want to only plant your sweet potatoes outside when there is no more danger of frost. So for us, that's about the 20th of May, sometimes even a little bit later. And you'll want to water them soon after planting, or you can plant them right after it rains, which is the case here. As you can see, the fabric is all wet. Planting the plants is very similar. You just pop out the little plants that are in the soil and stick them right down in each hole. Sometimes the stem will be really long. You can break one off to plant it, just like I talked about and like I'm showing you here. Sticking some of those leaves right down in the soil, just leaving a couple sticking out the top, and there you have a plant. Tip number 2 that I'm going to share with you is it's really a good idea to get a soil test, and this is for your whole garden, but it really makes a difference for sweet potatoes. You want nice, fertile soil for them to grow in, and it's important that you do a soil test and understand what your soil needs and amend it appropriately. The third tip that I'm going to give you for growing really great sweet potatoes is don't overwater them. And this can be hard if it's outside where you're growing them, which of course that's what I'm doing, and if you get a lot of rain. But they only need about 1 inch of water per week. And if you give them too much water, what happens is they can grow too fast and they almost crack and split because the potatoes grow too fast and they grow out of their skin, and you end up with really rough, odd looking potatoes. So then once these are all planted, I weed them a couple of weeks later. Just sometimes there's a few small weeds that come up through the holes around the plants. They're very minor. And once those weeds are pulled, the plants usually get big enough to shade out any new weeds after that. And that's all I do until harvest. So I literally plant these and forget about them. And of course you can see we water with drip line, which helps us to control the water that they get. But that happens while we're watering the rest of the whole garden. So I literally don't do anything with the sweet potatoes then until it's time to harvest. They take about 100 days to grow. So we usually harvest them sometime in mid to late September. You want to let them go as long as possible, but you're also going to want to cure them. And so you're going to want enough warm weather left in your forecast to get them cured so they will keep. And look what they turn into, just a big mass of vines growing on top of the fabric. It's why it's really nice to grow on fabric, because you definitely don't want to have to get down in those vines to try to weed. It would be almost impossible. Then when it's time to harvest, I just pull the vines right off the top of the fabric. And you can put them in the compost pile. By the way, you're definitely going to want to grow your sweet potatoes in a fenced area if possible, because sweet potatoes are a deer's favorite food. So we grow in we have a high fence around our garden, and that helps to keep any of the critters out, as long as everybody remembers to keep the gate shut. So I'm just pulling up the vines, and then I'm going to just pull up the fabric, pull out the staples, and the kids and I are going to dig these up. It's always really fun to see how many potatoes we end up with. Then I just use a potato fork and gently loosen the soil and pull up the potatoes, and they tend to grow straight down right underneath where you planted them. And they can be spread out a little bit, but I find since they're grown on fabric that the potatoes are generally right underneath where the plant was, so that makes them easier to dig. The fourth tip I'm going to give you is that you're going to want to harvest these before frost, because just like when you plant them in the spring, it's the same in the fall. Sweet potatoes cannot handle any frost, and if they do get frosted, they can take the frost from the leaves down to the roots, and they will not end up keeping as well. So it's really important that you dig your potatoes before frost. You're also going to want to cure your potatoes, and to do that, you're going to want to put them in a warm location. Ideally, it would be about 90 degrees and 90% humidity for a week, but that isn't usually possible because for us in Nebraska, it's cooler by this time of year. And since sweet potatoes are a long season thing, that's just, how we can't harvest them any sooner. So we just lay them out in a dry, sunny location and let them cure and develop kind of a good hard skin. And then that allows them to keep in our house at room temperature. They prefer to be at room temperature for up to a year. I plant about 150 sweet potato plants every spring, and I've never actually weighed the harvest because the tubs that we put them in are so heavy, but we usually get 4 or 5 20-gallon tubs full of sweet potatoes. And because they keep so well, you really can enjoy them all year. And the great thing is they don't require any preservation other than the curing. Like, you don't have to can them or freeze them, and you can eat on them all winter long. And they are so healthy and nutritious, especially when grown organically. Well, I hope that you have enjoyed this video and that it's been inspiring to you. Please hit that like and subscribe button as we share 2 videos every week showing you how to grow a simple, sustainable life on a modern-day homestead. And I'll see you in the next video.